Hello everyone, this is Timothy Mark with Alexandria.
How's everybody today?
And we have an awesome show for you today. Our special guest today is Andrea Perron. And she is part of the family that the movie The Conjuring 1 was loosely based on. And so let's get into the story. What I want to do before we get into the story of The Conjuring 1 is just a few points that I want to make. I wish that all generations of people out there could have a little bit of common sense. Just a little bit. Maybe that's a little too much to ask for, but common sense and just have a thought process. Okay? Movies embellish facts. Sometimes they'll take an aspect of a haunting and they'll take one aspect of it and just focus on that one thing. In some movies, I'm referring to many movies based on hauntings, not just The Conjuring 1, but some movies, the movie will be more terrifying than the actual situation was, and in some cases, the movie will be less terrifying than the actual situation was. What we want to look at here is the fact that we know The Conjuring 1 had a lot of untruths in it, okay? Some of the untruths was this Bathsheba Sherman. She was not a witch. She did not kill a baby. And she did not hang herself, which is one of the most powerful scenes in the film, is when Lorraine sees the witch hanging from the tree. Does that mean that nobody hung from the tree? No, that's not what it means. What it means is it could have been a demon hanging from that tree, and the demon misrepresented himself and called themselves Bathsheba. It does not mean that Lorraine didn't see somebody hanging from the tree. All it means is that the name that she was given, or who she perceived it to be, was not the actual name. And so, yeah.
And what better than to make a witch the villain in this particular film? So what the film is really doing is taking a figure that a lot of people are afraid of, or something a witch brings on connotations of being in league with the devil, for thousands of years. So what a better, they couldn't have picked a better marketing tool for this film to have Bathsheba portrayed as a real witch with all the demonic implications. And that's why what Timothy was mentioned is a lot of times Hollywood will take creative license and really embellish. I mean, let's face it, folks, they're in it to make money, to sell film, to have as many people attend the film as possible. So the more horrific, scary, demonic, and that's what's selling, the more people that will make their way to the cinema to see the film. So from the perspective of Hollywood, they may say based on a true story, but there'll be aspects that are not true.
It's loosely based on a story. Even The Haunting in Connecticut, which the Warrens did. If you go on YouTube and listen to Lorraine Warren talk about it, she's sitting down with two young people that's doing an interview with her. And in that interview, she says the film is loosely, very loosely, based on what actually happened in Connecticut.
And our guest today was involved, or one of the family members that lived on, and it's the old Arnold estate. For a lot of you that may not know it,
I think we should say that the house in Connecticut is not what the Conjuring film was based on. It was based on a house in Harrisville, Rhode Island. So,
yeah, Harrisville, Rhode Island, and it is referred to as the old Arnold estate, and it was really 200 acres in size, and it was one of the original plantations in the area that was surveyed by colonist John Smith in 1680, and the country home was built in 1736.
What I want to say is, in the last podcast we did, we actually indicated the fact that a lot of people do not pay tribute to the Warrens. After we did that show, we found out why. A lot of people think the Warrens are frauds. And I want to say this. The reason why they think that's because of some of the numbers that have been put out there. Okay, Ed and Lorraine have said that they visited the Borley Rectory 2,000 times. That place is not even in America. So that causes some questions in a lot of people's minds. Also, the priest that they were working with claimed to do 40,000 exorcisms. Let's put it into perspective for you. There's 365 days in a year. He would have to be 120 years old and have been doing exorcism since he was born to do that every day of his life. So, you know, these are the things that throw
speculation into the mix.
Yeah, with the numbers being so off. It seems like everything that's referred to when it comes to talking about one of their cases is thousands to thousands to thousands. And that you know, I feel like that's being embellished a lot. However, we do need to pay tribute to the Warrens, because for the people that are doing paranormal investigations on television today, they able to do this work today because of the Warrens. The Warrens didn't just open the door. They kicked the door open for paranormal researchers to be able to do this work. When they were doing it, there was a lot more skeptics out there, and it was very difficult to face the general public when doing this type of work.
So what we're trying to tell you is that the internet should not be your go-to source for factual, historical information. It's a good jumping off point, a starting point to gather references, but you certainly cannot believe everything that is on the internet. You've got to roll up your sleeves, do some real research.
Not even in the movies, because when you do the research on Bathsheba Sherman, where it says she was hung, if you look at her death certificate indicates she died of a stroke.
Paralysis due to a stroke. So there was no way that she hung herself.
And let's get into the fact that just because the movie producers decided to take the film in a different direction, and just because who was on the set, Lorraine Warren, Tony Spear, Judy Spear, if you look at the people that was on the set, Judy was a child when The Conjuring was happening. Tony wasn't even in the picture when the Conjuring story was happening. And Lorraine was, but I think she was a little bit confused as to what was actually going on in the film. So when you look at those items, just because the producers and directors take creative license to take the story one way, does not mean the haunting did not happen. I absolutely believe the haunting happened.
But it's just another way, again, it's all about the money, where facts are embellished upon, little tidbits to make it more horrific and scary. I mean, if you're going to add a witch and satanic rituals into the mix, several hangings and brutal murders, I mean, you've got a recipe for financial gain. And what a better setting than, you know, this 200 acres of this particular original plantation for the setting of a story. And I certainly believe that there was paranormal, supernatural phenomena going on with the family, but again, a great creative license in some avenues of the film were taken, and we're trying to tell our listeners, please learn how to differentiate between fact and fantasy for the world of Hollywood out there.
One of the things that were made up, in my opinion, is you see the I'm having a hard time catching my breath. Go ahead.
You'll see various things in the film, and we all know that Bathsheba, her hanging or a noose, factored heavy into the film, and the whole aspect of her being a witch. That was the key selling point for the film, is have a so-called witch sacrifice a baby for a satanic ritual. I mean, what better? I mean, I wish Hollywood could have came up with something more original, but it did that. Taking the story down that avenue sure made a lot of money for the film.
Okay, but another thing I was trying to get into was the cameras. The cameras, supposedly the Warrens caught all this evidence in the movie. You've seen the cameras going off, right? Flash, flash, flash. In one scene, the guy's holding a video camera, and he actually said that he caught an apparition on film. Well, where is this evidence? Why have we not seen this evidence? Obviously, that's something the producers and the directors have made up.
So today we have our special guest is Andrea Perron, and she's actually the eldest daughter of Roger and Carolyn Perron, and she has 4 sisters: Nancy, Christine, Cynthia, and April. So she'll be talking to us today about her experiences in this particular old Arnold estate, and she also has a book, House of Darkness, House of Light, and we'll be talking to her about that. And she does give seminars across the country in regards to her experiences in this home. So it'll be interesting to talk to her about her recollections and how it still affects her today.
And I will say, preparing for this podcast, we spent hours of research. We listened to Andrea Perron's seminars. We listened to her interviews. We researched death records. We listened to Norma, the lady who was the current resident of the home after the film was made, prior to the film being made, and during the film being made. And we listened to a lot of her concerns, and I think what I would like to say is she's trying to say the haunting didn't happen because the whole Bathsheba story is crap. And so, okay, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't somebody else that was representing themselves as Bathsheba, right? Is that correct? And we'll find out when we get Andrea on here. I'd also like to say that if you take The Conjuring as a horror film and look at it as a horror film, it's a great horror film. But when somebody says that it's based on a true story, let me tell you how they can do a 2-hour movie based on a true story. It could be a guy that owned a Chevrolet pickup truck who went to a McDonald's, and they put that in the movie, and everything else in the movie can be made up, and guess what? It's based on a true story.
So yeah, that's just how they embellish and have great creative license on wanting to make a film out of inspired true events. So The Conjuring really, and in her own words, in her own words, and this is in quotations, is essentially true. There are elements of fiction in it, however. For the most part, in broad, sweeping strokes, it captures the true elements of what we endured for 10 years in the farmhouse. And that was based on an interview with CBS This Morning on 2013. So that was what Andrea mentioned in the interview.
And actually, we listened to a seminar she gave, I think, before the movie even came out. And if you listen to her talk, she gives a very different story than what the film portrays. And I think that her story is a very good story, and you should go out and get one of her books. And it's a story worth hearing and worth reading. I just think that the way that they portray The Conjuring is a true story. And the Warrens have to accept some of the blame for the criticism that they get when they throw out numbers, and they have a priest they're working with that throws out numbers that are just ridiculous. Almost every time you come into the Warrens situation back in the 70s, every location was thousands of times. Everything was thousands of times. Well, that's where a lot of the mud gets slung, and a lot of people will discredit them because even the priest they were working with claimed they'd done 40,000 exorcisms. Impossible. And so, to visit the Borley Rectory, why would you go there 2,000? What did they say? 1,000 or 2,000?
2,000 times.
2,000 times. Why would you go there 2,000 times? Just say you went there. And again, I'm not bashing the Warrens. I'm bashing their numbers, but I'm not bashing them because they are paranormal royalty. They did fight for paranormal researchers to be able to do what they're doing today, and everybody should show them respect. And we appreciate the people that we know in the family today, Chris, Judy, and Lorraine. And we definitely just think that maybe if they would just say, hey, we've done this, and not say we've done it a million times, then, I think that maybe they will get more credibility.
This is a case where the number of times that you visit a location does not hold as much weight as having 1 or 2 times where you produced a massive amount of scientific information and scientific data, because we know a lot of times in paranormal research, science and spirituality does not always go hand in hand, because there are extreme skeptics in the scientific world that are just out there to debunk and defraud people as soon as any evidence is actually portrayed to everybody.
And the Warrens are real. Their research is great, and they've done a lot of amazing work out there. It's just, we've heard so much complaints on why so many people don't pay them tributes, and I think it could be readjusted if they just will not throw out numbers, because they they're just degrading the actual work that they've actually done. And so
that's just a key example of how important quantity is not as important as quality. And that's a prime example there on, it's all about the quality, not the quantity.
And I would like to say this. A lot of the books and a lot of the films about hauntings are embellished because they're trying to sell a product, okay? But the Warrens did, not every location they did has been turned into a film. And so what you got to understand is they've done a lot of great work and helped a lot of great people. And so for all the legit paranormal researchers out there, let's pay respect for the people who busted the doors open so we can do what we do today. And, let's recognize the fact that when something says it's based on a true story, that actually, today, in today's world, doesn't even have to hold fact. That movie don't have to have one shred of fact in it for them to make up and say, hey, it's based on a true story. We're going to hear what actually happened in the Conjuring home, in the farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, from Andrea, when she gives us a call. And, looking forward to hearing the true story. What about the Conjuring mirror? We do know from Chris's interview, it's in the museum. Could not find any information on the internet.
Well, it's actually known as, it's a music box toy, and it's a vintage music box toy that you wind up and a clown comes up, and then it has that periscopic mirror. And the individual of the little boy that the younger sister was speaking to, and you would see him at various times throughout the film. We will ask Andrea if that little boy did exist, or that was just something that Hollywood took and ran with it. And then, one of the most questions that I'm sure a lot of our listeners will want to know, why in the heck did you stay in the home for 10 years? Because Hollywood portrayed it, again, in their own fashion, horrific. Why, if it was that horrific, I'm sure she's so sick of that question.
Well, it wasn't that horrific. If you actually listen to her story, the family actually appreciated the spirits and the ghosts that were in the home. And so that's the difference. They took the movie and they made it to this whole other element to it where it was terrifying. So then in that case, because they did live in the home for 10 years, the Perron family did.
Yes.
And if you look at that, then you say, well, why 10 years, like Alexandria was saying. But the point is, they got along with the spirits. So it's completely different than what the actual movie's portraying. And so, however it was haunting, the lady that owns the home wants to sit there and say, oh, it was not haunted, we didn't experience no hauntings when we came here. Okay, I think, and it could be, she's just pissed off at the production company. That's why she's saying it. She's already indicated she didn't want trespassers on the land. And I agree, people should not be going to the home and taking liberties to take pictures out there. That should not be what you're doing. You should be respectful to do that. If you do want to go out there and take pictures, why not send a letter to the address and ask if you could go do it, and maybe they'll charge you a fee to come out there and do it on a private tour or something. You don't know. Just don't take the liberty to go out there by yourself. I mean, I don't know if they're willing to do that or not. Also, that home was built in the 1700s. If there was any home that had the potential to have spirits in it and be haunted, that one was definitely a home that could be haunted.
Because as we know, back in those days, people lived and died in their homes. You were born in your home, and in those times, historically, you died in your home. So with this country home being built in 1736, yes, there would be a lot of births, but there also would be a lot of deaths. And that just goes hand in hand. So a home that has that much history, and we know that, items such as wood, different kinds of rocks hold supernatural psychic energy. So the vibrations of what happened in the past certainly would be still there. And I mean, anybody that knows anything about that would realize that as well. So,
and it'd be crazy to think that nobody was murdered on that land, and it'd be crazy, and which is what the lady claims, then because she's looking at a black book. But not every murder was recorded. I mean, some people, what about the disappearances out there? What about the people who've been killed and buried out there? I mean, nobody knows where the bodies are. And so, it'd be ridiculous to think there were never a homicide out there, never suicides out there after all this time. I mean, obviously there's a lot of tragedies that took place in America. And during all these centuries now, there has to have been suicides and homicides out there.
That's right. And we also know from a historical point of view is that a lot of times, infants did not reach teenage years, and a lot of people, opposed to being buried in a cemetery, they buried their family members on their own property. Tombstones could have been lost. They could have been from simply made out of wood. So there could be a lot of people that are buried there, and that could be a lot of reasoning for the paranormal phenomena as well.
Correct. And so a lot of people try to discredit Lorraine Warren because she says she's seen Bathsheba hanging from a tree. That's the name she was given. Again, I know I talked about that when we first started this, but that's the name that she was given. A demon could have been representing that witch hanging from a tree and gave the name Bathsheba. We know Bathsheba is a nice church-going woman. So let's get this out of the head that she was a witch. She was not a witch. She was actually a member of the Baptist church, and she was a church-going woman. For those people who's been out to her grave and try to do paranormal research out there and all this stuff, get off of that, man. That's the whole thing. Even Ed and Lorraine, before they would do a location or whatever, they did extensive research first. And so you have to look at historical documents. You cannot just hear from a movie, a Hollywood movie, the name Bathsheba and run out to the grave. No, look at the death certificate. Look at what she was a member of. She was a member of a church. And all these people out there online posting that she was a witch and at the witch's grave and all this. All you're doing is degrading a church-going woman. And I believe that rumor was started by a demon that the family encountered, or Lorraine encountered out there at the farmhouse.
So that, and she was given a bad rap. And but like I said, it sure in the heck sold a lot of movies or got a lot of people to the theater in regards to the witch performing satanic rituals.
And it was said she killed a baby with a needle, and there's no record of that at all happening. There's a record that says a baby died out there, but it was not Bathsheba's baby. And it was out there, I don't know if it was even in the house. It was somewhere around the premises, I guess. And hopefully we'll find out more from Andrea on that one. As we've been digging into records, we put 2 days worth of research into this, and it's been a lot of work, man. We found out a lot of stuff. I myself, as a fan of the Conjuring film, I was a little disappointed to find out that the movie was basically a bowl of crap as far as the storyline. I mean, it's very disappointing to me. And when you have Lorraine Warren out there, if you listen to her interviews that she did with the director of the film, it was clear that she did not have a true understanding of what was going on out there. And that's why where I kind of look towards Tony and say, why, how did this happen? How did the story get so messed up? But then again, Tony was not around at the time that they did that investigation. So, yeah.
And I mean, it just goes to show you, and we'll ask Andrea herself in regards to her the 3-book House of Darkness, House of Light, that not all spiritual, not all entities are negative or demonic. There are people that are not going to be negative. So
Yeah.
I think that's the purpose of, House of Darkness, House of Light.
This is our guest right here. So let's go ahead, huh? Hello, welcome to the Tickle Trunk of Horror Show. You're on with Timothy, Mark, and Alexandria. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Are we okay?
Good, thank you.
And you're having a good day today?
So far so good. Yeah, it's. I slept till 9, which is unheard of for me.
Is it snowing out there where you at? Are you still up north, or are you back down south?
I am down in Florida.
Oh yeah.
And it's absolutely lovely. I live in paradise. It's beautiful here.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, we were talking about the story, and we're glad that you wanted to join us or accepted our invitation to join us today, because what we're trying to clear up is a little bit of the differences between the book and the seminars and the actual movie. We do know, even in one of your interviews you did where you talked about, some of the movie had fiction in it. And what we're trying to distinguish for the people out there is what elements of the film was fiction and what elements were real. And so listening to a lot of the seminars and speeches that you gave, you actually seem to have had a very positive experience with the spirits that were in the home, whereas the movie portrayed it to be something horrible and terrifying.
Yes, well, it was both, which is why the 3 books, the trilogy of books that I wrote, that is the true story of the 10 years that we lived in the farmhouse. The trilogy is called House of Darkness, House of Light. And yes, there are elements in there that are truly horrifying, things that were so far above and beyond what you saw in The Conjuring that when James Wan read my books, he's like, oh, no way. No way can we include, something like this. It will literally scare people right out of the theater. And so they fictionalized events. And of course, The Conjuring, which was the only film in the series that my family is associated with, it's based on the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren, as is the entire series. So it was made from predominantly their perspective. And there were things that happened in that house with the Warrens that did not make it into their case files, or certainly did not make it into the film, because it didn't particularly reflect well on them. But I put everything in the books. And even though, sometimes the truth hurts, I was very careful in the writing not to say anything, or, not to put anything in the books that was in any way judgmental of the Warrens, because I don't feel that way about them. I think that they did the best that they could in a situation that was quite beyond them. And in fact, 40 years after the last time I saw Lorraine Warren, I was with her out in Hollywood for a private screening of The Conjuring, approximately 3 months before it premiered internationally. And she said to me then, we were in over our heads from the minute we crossed the threshold of your house.
Right, and that's we're actually friendly with the grandson of Ed and Lorraine, and we as paranormal researchers, we respect a lot of the work that they've done in the field for people like us in today's world, as they open the doors. But one of the things,
they did, but they made some mistakes because they're humans.
Exactly.
And and this was new. I mean, this is still considered pseudoscience, and all accepted science now was once considered pseudoscience. But we are, as investigators, people like you out in the field who are doing the legwork, are we're compiling to the bulk of evidence so that eventually one day this will be considered science. And the only way that we can, because that's what it is, essentially, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And so eventually we will have compounded enough evidence that any skeptic in the world's jaw will just drop, because you know it's out there. I know it's out there. You know, but there's a proclivity that happens in this field that I have found disturbing, and that is that there are many groups who hoard their evidence. You know, we got it, it's ours, we're not sharing it, it's, you know, and almost afraid to put it out in the field because the paranormal community is a self-devouring beast. You know, before anybody out in the quote-unquote real world sees it, somebody within this community will have completely torn it apart and trashed it, just because I don't know why. I can't explain it.
Right.
But I will tell you, though, that I don't need to see any evidence. I don't need to investigate. I'm out looking for stuff I know already exists. It almost seems counterintuitive to me.
Let me ask you this, Andrea, because we're coming to Lorraine's defense a little bit here, because she's been accused by a lady named Norma of being a fraud. And we know that Lorraine is not a fraud. And the reason why this lady's accusing her of being a fraud is because she's saying that Lorraine said that Bathsheba was the one hanging from the tree, and that's not how Bathsheba died. Now, we did see the death certificate to where Bathsheba died of a stroke, but that doesn't mean that Lorraine didn't see somebody hanging from the tree. Maybe that's the name that they gave Lorraine. And so we're trying to let people out there know that demons and evil spirits will misrepresent themselves.
I have a history with Norma, and she did everything to trash my family and trash my mother. After she bought that house because of its history and because of its reputation as being haunted. Walked into my restaurant in Pawtucket, Rhode Island one day back in the late 80s, recognized my business partner, identified herself, and said, "Oh gosh, I have to tell you, I just bought an old haunted house up on Round Top Road in Harrisville." And I dropped my knife. I was working in the kitchen. I knew immediately that, you know, what house she was talking about, because it was my former home. And I went out and I had lunch with her. I, you know, just dumped everything on my employees, and I went out and I had lunch with her, and we talked for hours. We became friends. We were friends for 28 years. Over the course of that 28 years, she invited one paranormal group after another into that house, without my knowledge. But what I did appreciate about our friendship was that, you know, I only lived about 10 miles away from the farm, and I was able to go back and visit whenever I wanted to, which brought me a great deal of comfort because I loved the place. And so it was a real hardship. After I wrote the book, she was completely on board. She bought tons of them for me to sign and to give to her family and friends. Everything between us was just fine until The Conjuring came out. Now, apparently she's unable to discern that The Conjuring is a movie, that it is, like most movies that are based on any kind of a true story, liberties were taken. However, one thing she is absolutely correct about is that Lorraine misidentified the offending spirit in the house. And Norma is very well aware that that house is haunted. I don't care what she has said publicly. I don't care about her vitriolic diatribes on YouTube. You know, I could have shut that down a long time ago. I could have had my attorney send her a letter and make all of that disappear. And I have chosen instead to let her expose herself. You know, if anybody has any question in their mind in terms of what I'm telling you and my veracity, please just Google Ghost Hunters, Season 2, Episode 7, that goes back into the 90s sometime. And the second half of that hour-long episode is called the Sutcliffe investigation. You know, she got her 15 minutes of fame, and she wanted that house to be famous. And then when the house got famous, and all of a sudden the lunatic fringe of society started mulling around the property and intruding and imposing themselves on her, she got upset. She had every reason to be upset. She had no reason to be upset with my family or anybody around The Conjuring, because she knew there was going to be a film. She knew it was going to be fictionalized. She knew that it was going to be based on the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren and not on my books. You know, I'm Bathsheba's great defender. I have an entire chapter in Volume 3 that's just devoted to her. And everything that's written about her in the first two books was the hearsay, was what was told to us by people in the town, by the town historians, by, you know, people who informed our family in real time as we lived there about this individual. Now, apparently she wasn't the nicest person on earth, but she certainly wasn't the one that was haunting and taunting my mother, and in fact, the one that was creating havoc in the house was dead long before Bathsheba Sherman was ever born. Bathsheba Sherman was not an Arnold. She did not live in the house. We were told that she was, and that she did, by several people in town, but apparently they had their story wrong. And the truth is that she was born into wealth. She was from a union of the Taft and the Fair families that both lived in Providence. And, you know, both of those, there are street names for this family. You know, they helped build Brown University. I mean, this was an old, established, well-established family that came from England. And both of her descendants on both sides. And she ended up marrying Judson Sherman, who owned the Sherman Farm up on Collins Taft Road in Harrisville. And so, as the crow flies, her home was only about maybe a mile away from the old Arnold estate, which is where we lived. All of this is clarified in my books. You know, I mean, the truth is out there. It's not like, you know, people have to rely on a fictionalized version of events in The Conjuring in order to understand what really, truly happened. And to their credit, there was no way that they could compress 10 years into 2 hours. It's impossible.
Andrea,
so what they did was they cherry-picked from my story and from the bulk of it from Mrs. Warren's perspective and her journaling of, you know, her chronicling of the events that happened. They only visited our house 5 or maybe 6 times total in 18 months, over about a year and a half. They came the night before Halloween in 1973, and the last time that they were in the house was the night of the seance that occurred that went so woefully wrong, so dreadfully badly, that it almost cost my mother her life. And my father threw them out of the house in no uncertain terms, and they had to leave with their cinematographers and their audio specialist and the priest and the medium and everybody that they showed up at our house with that night, unexpectedly. They had told my mother that they wanted to drop by. They did not tell her they were bringing a caravan. They did not tell her there would be an entourage. And they did not tell her that they wanted to do a seance in the house. All of that got sprung on them when they showed up at the door. My father was furious. He wanted no part of it. And it ended so badly that they never came back except for once they stopped. Just the two of them. And my mom didn't let them in the house. She opened the door. She spoke with them briefly, and they left. And they came back to see if she was still alive, because when they left the house that night, they did not know if she would survive.
Wow. And what I'm going to say to you, Andrea, and this is just my perspective too, that, I've grown up in small towns too. And I think a lot of feuds, because I'm a historian at heart, and I know a lot of feuds and a lot of reputations have been smeared. And I'm a lifelong empath. And what I gather from this particular story is that, something happened with Bathsheba. She rubbed somebody really literally the wrong way. So it's a matter of town gossip or fairy tales that get started to tarnish the reputation of an individual. And I think that I'm glad in your book that you've rectified how Bathsheba, there was really a smear campaign against her, that it could have been an incident that happened in her lifetime and it offended somebody in the town. And, just like the Salem witch trials, people are ostracized for maybe some little incident. Maybe she didn't want to comply with somebody's advances. We don't know that, but certainly the town has used her as the villain, and I think it's very, very unfair. And further to Lorraine Warren, with her abilities, I know when we go out on cases, myself being an empath, I've gone to Scotland, I've gone to various battlefields, that it's not an exact science. We cannot control who wants to give a message to us, and sometimes these messages can be muddled and they're not perfection.
Yes, I completely agree with you, and one of the points, one of the underlying undercurrents of the trilogy is a message to humanity, and that is, be careful what you say about, if you're going to accuse someone of murder, you better know for sure that they did it. And Bathsheba was accused of murdering an infant in that house. Now, to give credit where credit is due in terms of Mrs. Warren, the night that she and Ed showed up at our kitchen door, my mom had no idea who they were. She never approached them. She never heard their names. She never knew. She had no idea who they were. But it was a very cold night, and she let them in the house. And Lorraine walked over to our big black stove, and she put her hand on the corner of it and covered her eyes, and she said, "I sense a malignant presence in this house. Her name is Bathsheba." Now, my mother was very taken with that she would intuit something like that, because she had no idea of the history of the house, and yet Mr. McEachern, who was the town historian at the time, he was in his 90s when we met him. He knew Bathsheba Sherman. She died when he was 10 years old, and in 1885. He was born in 1875. So he was close to 100 years old when we met him. And he's the one that told us, told my mother particularly about the history of Bathsheba Sherman. And when he did, he lowered his eyes and said she was not a nice person, that she was very unkind to her help, to the farmhands over at Sherman Farm, that she would beat them, that she would starve them, that she would make them sleep out in the barn as punishment. On the coldest nights, they could literally freeze to death. That she was not a nice person. But the more I dug into and communicated personally with Bathsheba, the more I understood that she had had a tremendously difficult life. She had 4 children. 3 of them were dead by the age of 4. Only 1 survived her. That was not that atypical at that time. But chances are, and none of us are ever going to, let me emphasize this, none of us are ever going to know for certain who any of the spirits were in that house. The residual energy, the visitations, all of that, through all of the sightings, through all of the interactions, none of them ever walked up to one of us and said, "Hello, my name was." It's not how it works. Anybody that's serious in this field knows that this is drifting in and out of dimensions. These are energy fields. Some of us can see it, some of us can't. Sometimes we can pick it up on camera and audio. Sometimes we can't. The ball's not in our court. It depends on how much energy a spirit is able to manifest in order to manifest.
Andrea.
So it's an imperfect science. And so, but let there be no question in anyone's mind that Norma Sutcliffe bought completely in to all of this for all the years and all the visits and all the books and all the everything until she saw The Conjuring. And then her head blew off because they misrepresented Bathsheba Sherman in the film. And they made her the culprit, they made her the villain, and they made her the bad guy. And it wasn't her. I'm not saying she was a perfect person, but at the time, it was only 100 years past, the Salem witch trials, and people in town were throwing around the name witch. It could have cost her life. According to the records that my mother found in Worcester, Massachusetts, I don't know why they were, stored in another state, but according to what she found out and what Mr. McEachern told her, that when she was a young woman, and apparently already married to, marriage then was, if you were not married by 15 or 16, you were considered an old maid because life expectancy was 40. So she was apparently at our house. We don't know whose baby was in her care, if it was her own, or if it was an Arnold baby, or who. But according to the town historian, and then backed up by another town historian from an adjacent town, Edna Kent, the story with Bathsheba was that she was a young woman, probably in her late teens, and that a baby died in her care at our house, not her house. And that when the body was autopsied, they found that a needle had been inserted at the base of the skull, and the cause of death was convulsions. Now, there was an inquest in the town of Chepachet because the town of Burrowville was not even incorporated yet. It was just a series of villages, including Harrisville, which is where our house is, or was, is, our former house is. And apparently, during the inquest, the judge decided that there was not any evidence that she had maliciously or deliberately killed this baby. And so she was off the hook in the same way that Lizzie Borden talked her way out of whatever she had any part of or did not. We don't know. And, history cannot give us a definitive answer on either one of them. However, that was in the days when everyone made their own clothing. There was not mass production of clothing. And if you lived out in the country, you made your own. There were sewing baskets and knitting baskets and so on and so forth in people's homes. And there's no reason, that she shouldn't receive the benefit of the doubt, that if this actually did happen, as history has passed it down, then it's just as conceivable that a toddler fell into a sewing basket and went into convulsions and she didn't know why, and probably panicked just as much as the baby that was dying. We don't know. And so for it to be represented on film the way it was, I understand why Norma was put off by that. I'm going to spend the rest of my life covering two subjects. One, the Annabelle doll had absolutely nothing to do with our story. None of us ever saw it. It was woven into that story to set up for another movie, because that's how cynical they are in Hollywood, or as I call them, Holly Weird. That's what they do. They just took that story and they weaved it into the tapestry of The Conjuring, and then they set up another story for it. And that's how it goes. But no, we had nothing to do with Annabelle. None of us ever saw that doll. We knew it was a Raggedy Ann doll. That's all that we knew about it. We didn't even know that until decades after we had moved out of the house. And the second thing is Bathsheba Sherman being blamed for all the mayhem that happened at that farmhouse. It was not her. And according to Mr. McEachern, in the late 1700s, one of the original mistresses of the house, after it was built, who was 93 years old, Mrs. John Arnold, decided to hang herself in the barn after her husband died. They had both lived well beyond life expectancy for that period of time. And I guess, and I don't know, if I were her and my husband died and I just didn't want to go on, maybe that's why spirits, sometimes, people take their own lives and then remain earthbound.
Hey, Andrew.
Because they're afraid to go to the light, because they don't know if it's the light of God or if it's the light of eternal damnation. And, and if you think that people are indoctrinated religiously now, think back 200-300 years ago.
Andrew.
Everything was about fear. Everything was
Andrew.
about, God being the punisher.
Andrew.
Fear God.
Let us ask you this, to get off the Bathsheba Sherman for a minute. What is some of the actual terrifying things that happened to you and your family in the home?
Oh my God, I wrote 1,500 pages over 7 years to denote everything that's terrifying that happened in that house, but also all the good things that happened in that house and what we learned about life after death, that there is life beyond, there is something beyond our mortal existence. And we all know that. None of us are afraid to die because we all know that in some way, shape, or form, our energy continues on. And, perhaps we're the ones that decide where we go and when we go. And, we don't know any of this, but there were things that happened in that house that quite literally strained credulity. And this is certainly a case where the truth is stranger than fiction.
What about the
I'm
Conjuring?
not saying The Conjuring's not a good movie. It is, but
Right.
It doesn't scratch the surface of what actually happened there.
What about was this a factual event? I know your younger sister was talking to that little boy, and then there was the vintage music box. So was that music box with the kind of periscopic mirror and the little boy factual, or was that again taking liberties from Hollywood?
Okay, well, there was a little boy, there was no music box. That was conjured up in the minds of screenwriters, as was about 95% of the film. I mean, that high a percentage that did not happen. My father did not warmly welcome the Warrens into our home. He was very skeptical about them. He didn't trust them. He thought that they might try to exploit our family, and he's very protective of his family, and he was very concerned. He did not want them there. My mother is the one that was so anxious for some assistance that she invested her trust in them, and then it was breached. So, and I don't even think that they did that deliberately. They just talked to people at their seminars, and they gave away a little too much information, and people started coming to our home that had heard about us at Warren seminars and wanted to come in the house and tour the house and meet the family. And my mother's like, no way is this happening. She signed a non-disclosure confidentiality agreement with Lorraine Warren, and she didn't breach it. Lorraine did. And I think it was just because they were so excited about what they had encountered and what they were already getting for evidence and the experiences that they had had in the short amount of time that they spent at the farmhouse, that they overspoke, they overshared information. I mean, it would have been one thing to talk about the stories and not use our names and not identify our location. That was the mistake that was made, among others. But they were human beings, and I don't hold, Ed, God rest his soul, he was very kind to us. He was really concerned about us, the 5 little girls in the house. And Lorraine spent most of her time interviewing my mother. But, we'll have to do another show for me to get into depth with you about the discrepancies between the real story and the film. And it's just a huge, huge story. And it's mind-boggling to me to try to encapsulate it into a few short, sound bites, because it's just bigger than that. You know what I mean?
Right. what concerns me is that one of the things that you just mentioned mere moments ago is the aspect of Lorraine Warren breaching the confidentiality agreement. Timothy and I, as paranormal researchers, take if our clients wish to remain anonymous, we take that very, very seriously, hence why our reputation is very important to us, that if, we would never dream of breaching somebody's confidential, the way they've told us a story. And I find that really disturbing when we have an individual. And was your mother has she pursued that? Did she want to pursue that? That's important for our listeners to hear.
My mother is 79 years old, and she's very frail.
Right.
And Lorraine is 91 or 92 and very frail.
Yes.
There will be no pursuing anything with Mrs. Warren, and there will be no pursuing anything around my mother. Those days are long gone, long gone. Mrs. Warren walked out of our house with my mother's detailed notebook, asked if she could take it and Xerox the information in it, including all the birth and death certificates, including all the information that my mother had gotten about the history of the house, and including all of my mother's testimonials about the experiences that she had in the house, and drawings of all of the apparitions that we had seen. And Mrs. Warren asked to borrow that notebook to make copies of everything that was in it, and my mother never saw it again.
Well,
my mother asked for it back repeatedly. And then after the seance and the night that my father threw everybody out of the house, that was it. My mother wrote to her and asked her if, it could be returned, along with some things that disappeared out of the house that night. Some things that my mom had found under the stairs, out in the barn. She had a little bag in the dining room that was there the night of the seance, and it was gone the next day. Now, I'm not accusing the Warrens of taking it. It could have been anybody. There were a lot of people in the house that night. But all I'm saying is that human beings make mistakes, and human beings sometimes make big mistakes.
Going back to your books, because the books talks about the actual experiences that y'all had as a family in the home. And so just to answer everybody's questions out there, the home is definitely haunted, but just the story, yes. The film just misrepresents the hauntings. And yes. Seems like you had a lot of good times and bad times in the home. For people out there wanting to buy the book, where's the best spot for them to get the book from?
Well, usually it's a very good seller, and so very often Amazon runs the books as a trilogy for a discount. Amazon's the fastest and the least expensive way to get House of Darkness, House of Light, Volume 1, 2, and 3. The reason is these books are, they're 500 pages apiece.
Wow.
This is a big, huge story that begins before we even move to the farm and ends after we leave. It covers 10 years plus, so that people understand that we were a perfectly normal family until we moved to that house, and then we became a paranormal family. And then we thought that leaving the farm would be leaving them behind, and nothing could have been further from the truth. Profound attachments were formed between our family and those spirits, and have persisted lifelong, and so that is carried through into Volume 3. It is an extensive collective memoir. It includes memories and even the writing of every single member of my family. And I'm very, very glad that my sister April, may she rest in peace, my baby sister, died in March of 2017.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And I'm glad she got to see the story told.
Yeah, we're sorry to hear that, Andrea. I'm glad that she got to see the story told as well. I'm glad that your mother got to see the story told. Your whole family got to see the story told. And I guess the thing that one more question that I want to ask you that the movie portrays is, in the film they set up cameras and video cameras. Was that fictional too, or was that made up?
No, that was real.
That was real. Did they
That
ever
was real,
capture anything?
absolutely. Yeah, that was, and one of the strangest things, and one of the reasons why I embraced The Conjuring is because there were what I call cosmic kisses in that film, inexplicable coincidences, including in my bedroom, Shanley Caswell plays me in the film.
Mm-hmm.
What a lovely young woman she is, truly lovely. There's one shot where they come around the corner and look into what would have been my bedroom, and there's a picture up on the mantle of a white cat. It's a folk art drawing of a white cat. And the set designer and no one else that was affiliated with creating that house for The Conjuring had any idea that that was a gift given to me while I lived at the farm. That picture, that exact picture, was given to me as a gift when I lived at the farm when I was 13 years old, and it's sitting 2 feet away from me hanging on my wall.
Wow.
Here in my office. They had no idea. Well, I got to tell you, it blew me back in my chair when I saw that at the private screening. I could not believe it. And there's a scene where Cindy's running through the house with a unique set of wind chimes to go hang on the porch. They're identical to the wind chimes that we had hanging on our porch. There's no way they could have known that. And they chose the one interior wallpaper, colonial wallpaper, that we had hanging in the house out of more than 20,000. And they never saw any inside photographs of the house so that they could have done a comparison analysis to be that authentic. They just chose it because the universe told them to. It's amazing. There are so many things. You know, I didn't even put in my books that our dog died as soon as we moved to the farm. Within days of moving to the farm, there was a tragic accident, and our dog died, you know, because I thought it was too morose, it was too sad, it was, you know, too overwhelming, and yet it appears in the film, you know, and I never told anybody that Schultz died, or how he died, because it was terrible, and you know, and there it is in the film, you know, so to me it's the cosmos just saying, it's okay, Annie, don't worry about it, it's fine. You know, if it weren't for The Conjuring, my books wouldn't have been read by hundreds of thousands of people. You know, if it weren't for The Conjuring, my books would be languishing in obscurity just like every other book out there. You know, I mean, I have a lot to be grateful for that New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers worked so diligently to tell the story the best way that they knew how, based on the information that they had from the Warrens.
But going back to those cameras that were set up, did they ever capture anything on the video or photographs?
I don't know if they caught anything on the set, but there were a number of incidents that occurred on the set. And I don't talk about that because those are stories that came to me from individual cast members and so forth, and those are their stories to tell.
No, I mean when the Warrens set up cameras in your home.
Well, yes. Well, they said that they never got anything. That everything came out, and I know for a fact that they played back the audio on the night of the seance, and it was nothing but white noise. There were no voices. There was no activity. There was nothing. And they said that only a very, very few photographs that they took at the farm ever developed, and it was mostly photographs that were taken outside from around the farm, not in the house. Although they did get several that came through in the house, and I very much appreciate the fact that Tony Spera, who is Lorraine's son-in-law, sent me the microfilm, sent me those photographs. He didn't need to do that, and he did it for me to use to promote our story, which I thought was a great kindness extended, and I very much appreciate it. You know, because he's aware that you know, his father and mother-in-law made some mistakes as well. And, you know, in Tony's work and what Tony has done, he's tried to improve upon methods and improve upon, you know, I don't know. I don't know him well enough. You know, I don't want to speak for him, but, you know, I think he was, he read my books. He was very complimentary of them. He's been a good friend. He's been a nice man to me. So I appreciate that very much. And, you know, he's aware that things go wrong during investigations. And he is aware of what happened at our house and how it happened. And I don't even blame the Warrens for, you know, embellishing a bit in terms of how it reflected on them in their case files. You know, it is what it is. And people make mistakes, and I'm a very forgiving person, and Lorraine's in her 90s and in failing health, and I'm not beating up on anybody. Not Norma, not Lorraine, not anybody. You know, I let the universe take care of everything, and I just kind of float through this life.
And
because that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, I think, and from my perspective, I've read a bit about what you've written, and I think, and this is just my feeling, and I may stand corrected, that you and your family were meant to move in there. There was a bigger plan. The whole plan hadn't been unveiled, but you were meant to move in there, to stay there, you know, to experience what you experienced, for you to have the capacity to relay a message to the world on certain aspects. And I think you're a conduit that is able to do that. And I don't know if you have any psychic medium abilities or you're an empath, but I think like God has a plan for everybody, and I think that was part of the master plan for you and your family, to be situated in those circumstances, so the end result is that you're able to, through your 3 books, to tell everybody, you know, what can happen, what does happen on different dimensions. And you were given, you know, maybe the task, as it were, to relay this particular message.
I agree. And, you know, I felt very much a misfit on this planet for decades of my life, and it was because I was working up to doing the thing that I was supposed to do, what I was born to do. I think that our family was supposed to move to the farm. We were supposed to live there for 10 years, and then 30 years later, I was supposed to start telling the story to the world when the world was ready to hear it. I agree with you, and I don't understand the Grand Master Plan. You know, I am a woman of faith. I am a deeply spiritual person, as is my whole family. The one thing that happened in the movie that my mother took great exception to, she thought the whole exorcism scene was just ridiculous, so she just dismissed it. But she took great exception to the fact that we were portrayed as somehow godless heathens, that we were not people of faith, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, we were all born and raised Catholic. We were all baptized. We were, you know, my father was going to be a priest before he met my mother, and then he fell in love, and so that plan got, you know, waylaid. But he was born and raised in the Catholic tradition, staunch Roman Catholic family. He went to parochial school. He was an altar boy for years and years. After he graduated, he went into the Navy to serve the country. And then when he was coming out of the Navy, he was going to go directly to the seminary. But he met my mother while he was in the Navy. Wow. You know, and it was not, we did not turn our backs on the Catholic Church. We were practicing Catholics. We went to church together as a family. The church turned its back on us. And my father was so hurt by what the priest said to him when we went to church on the second Easter that we were at the farm, and my little baby sister April said, when the priest blessed the congregation and said, "In the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost," April turned in a very quiet church and she said, "See, Mommy, God has ghosts just like us." And every head turned, and the priest followed our family out and asked my father to take his family and worship elsewhere. And we never ever went back to any church after that because my father was destroyed by that. It was, you know, his religion, his belief system, he was a devout Roman Catholic, and now he's not.
I think
He felt betrayed and he felt abandoned, and the people that he felt that we needed the most to help us through whatever was coming our way had just turned their backs on us, and it was because our priest was fear-based. And he didn't want to lose other members of the congregation because he still allowed the Perrons to come to St. Patrick's Church in Harrisville.
Let me ask you this question, because I'm a Navy veteran myself. Is your dad, I believe in the movie, didn't they portray him as a truck driver? Was he a truck?
Yes, none of that's true.
Oh, okay.
Kind of take the movie and wipe it out of your mind, okay, in
Okay.
terms of factual integrity. It's just not there. It is a piece of fiction. We never lived in New Jersey. We moved from Cumberland, Rhode Island to Harrisville, Rhode Island. My father was never a truck driver in his life. My father has been a businessman his entire life. He had his own private business. He had clients from Quebec to Ohio to Florida. And he sold jewelry. He sold fine jewelry, fashion jewelry, and imports from around the world, very fine imports. And that was his job. And he would go out on the road and take orders from all of his clients and travel countless miles and endless days. And he was gone away from home. And I guess rather than explain that, which they knew was the truth, they just made him a truck driver because it was easier. And
Right.
that would explain his absences from the house.
Right, and I think further to the priest and his congregation at the church, I think if that priest would have truly read the Bible does make reference to spirits and ghosts in the Bible, he wouldn't have treated your family in the manner that he did. So I wouldn't really hold that much. He wasn't much of a priest to not know the Bible in its entirety, to shun your family.
He was a priest with issues. And mostly around fear.
Exactly.
And so, again, I understand. Again, I do. I understand as upset as my dad was and as abandoned as he felt. I understand. People get afraid. And I'm sure that this particular priest did not want what my baby sister said to alienate any other people from the congregation, because what do they rely on in the congregation? They rely on a head count and a full basket.
Right.
Can I ask you this question? Because I know that we've been working on several different episodes of families that have been, their stories have been made into television movies. And you said your sister, when she passed away, what did she pass away from?
She died of a drug overdose, prescription drugs that were given to her by her surgeon for her to take the night before she was going to have spinal surgery to replace 2 discs in her neck.
Wow.
And he gave her a combination of oxycodone and a fentanyl patch. And the combination of them killed her. It stopped her heart while she was sitting up watching TV the night before her surgery.
Wow.
And her daughter found her body when she got there to pick her up to take her to the hospital the next morning.
Wow. That's we'd like to dedicate this show to her. I'm going to tell you something that's strange. When we started this show today, I had a hard time breathing. I was having a hard time with my chest, and you'll hear it in the show when we're talking before you call. That I was having a very difficult time with my chest, which is very strange. So I don't know what that can mean, but anyway, you got anything else, Allison?
I would like to thank you, though, Andrea, for you seem to have a huge heart, a very gentle spirit, and you're a very forgiving person. When there is a lot of things when people listen to this show would not be such forgiving as, and I know that the particular notes in your mother's journal, I certainly think should come back to your family. It belongs to your family.
It can't come back. It was sold as part of the case files.
Wow.
Oh man.
That's awful. And I mean, there's been so many wrongs and injustices that have been done to you and your family, and you're such a beautiful soul to have such a forgiving nature. But in, like you said, the universe will take care of it because you're able to speak about the truth, and the truth can be the hardest pill to swallow for a lot of people, but you're being the voice for the truth, whether it be or the real events. And I think the universe will continue to have a plan for you to be able to broadcast the truth, because that is the most powerful reward that you can be bestowed on, is being able to say the truth so people can understand.
And I have nothing to hide, and I tell every interviewer that I encounter, whether it be on television or radio, there are no questions off the table. None. You can ask me anything. You will receive a spontaneous, honest response. And that's just, and anybody that knows me, I have friends that I've had for 55 years and I'm 60. I go back, way back with some people. And they know the experiences that we had at the farm. They knew well before the rest of the world knew. It was not a well-kept secret in town that the Perrons lived in a haunted house. And many of our friends had experiences there. And, I've got all the backup that I could possibly need. I don't care what anybody says. I really don't, because it's not about that. And it's not about the tete-a-tete back and forth and the bickering and it's not about that. It's about the message to humanity. Yes, there is something beyond our mortal existence. Yes, take comfort in that. It's not just ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That pertains only to the body vessel. That's it. Our spirit goes on. Take faith and comfort in that.
Right. And what I'd like to say is that you definitely cleared up a lot of the myths as far as the film goes. I would definitely recommend anybody purchasing your books. And I can validate for sure what you just said is true, because a lot of times when we're doing an interview with somebody, they will say, well, what you going to ask, this and that. You never asked that question at all. You just said, yeah, I'll do the interview. And and it was just open for whatever we wanted to talk about. And so we definitely appreciate that.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's the only approach to take. If people in this field are going to be taken seriously, then they must be authentic. It's why I have absolutely no use for anyone in this field that fabricates evidence. Why would you do such a thing when there's a plethora of evidence around all the time in virtually any location? Do you think that there's no location on this planet where a person hasn't passed? The spirits are everywhere. They're omnipresent. They're around all of us all the time. We are the ones that put up that veil, that so-called veil that keep us living in a three-dimensional, five-sensory realm, but it's not the truth of our existence. And once that veil is just ripped away from a person and they're able to start interacting and seeing fourth dimensionally, fifth dimensionally, and beyond, whether it be from exposure or even overexposure to spirit, the way that we endured at the farmhouse, it was at times scary, but it was more enlightening. The Conjuring is a horror movie, but House of Darkness, House of Light is predominantly a love story.
Yeah, that's the feeling I got when I listened to your. Because we spent about 2 days of research on this before we actually did the interview, and we listened to you speak at a lot of the interviews that you've done, some of the stuff you've done at the paranormal festivals, conferences, and it seems like that. It seems like there was more of a positive experience for you in it than the negative experience.
Well, it gave us knowledge that most people never get, through their own life experience. A validation about the afterlife that most people never have. So as my mother once so wisely said, this is not the kind of story that one should rightfully take to the grave. The message is too important for humanity.
Yeah, and
I quite agree.
Yeah, and the history of that place was there before we came, and it'll be there after we go. And the history is just going to keep on going on that place. And for Norma to want to silence it is ridiculous. But we appreciate you joining the show, Andrea, and we definitely went above the time. Over the time. But I'll get back with you with the appropriate links when this is done. And if you could send me a picture of your sister, please, and I'll incorporate it into the video portion of this.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to do that. I'll do it as soon as we hang up. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Andrea. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You too. Peace to you both.
Peace.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Peace to you.
Bye-bye.
So, as you can hear, there's a lot of things that were revealed in this podcast. I think the one that gets me the most is that mirror. When we interviewed Chris,
well, it's actually called. It's actually a music box. It's a vintage music box that has that mirror that's almost like a psychedelic kind of a fun house mirror that as you're winding the music box, and then you'll see in the film that Ed Warren brings that particular vintage music box into the haunted museum.
Yeah.
And sits it on the shelf.
Yeah, he sits it on the shelf, and Chris said they have that in the museum, the Conjuring mirror. And I'm guessing that when he said they have the Conjuring mirror in the museum, I'm guessing he meant the one from the film, since the mirror didn't actually exist. But
very enlightening show from Andrea Perron. And if you go to her website or about her book, she actually is telling people to respect the property and the homeowners that currently live in the house and not to trespass. So I think it's very key that she's asking individuals to be respectful and not invade the privacy. And I believe it's Norma and her husband that still live there. So she's being, respectful and asking people to respect their privacy.
Yeah, and I listened to the interview with Norma and Andrea, and Norma, she did a video kind of trashing Andrea and Lorraine and Ed, and I'd say that it's very, it goes against the video that she did with Andrea, where she's basically admitting that it was haunted. She knew that it was haunted prior to purchasing it, and she wanted it because she wanted the house to be famous. I agree with that. I agree with what Andrea was saying, because it seems that way when you listen to their interview. And so then when you're going to have good and bad with that. So when you want the house to be famous, don't get mad when everybody's showing up. However, it is your property. People shouldn't be showing up. They should be showing respect, and they should go about the proper ways. I would recommend opening up for a house tour maybe 2 days a week and charging an admission.
And it's always, it's interesting to note that Andrea did tell us that 95% of the incidents that are portrayed were made up for the film. So 95% of the film was the incidents that they show in the film were made up.
Well, even Chris said don't look at it as factual. When we interviewed him, he said don't look at it as a documentary. So, and even they say it's based on a true story. Again, I go back to the interview where Lorraine was talking about a separate movie, The Haunting in Connecticut, when she's being interviewed, and the lady says it's based on a true story, and Lorraine's response was loosely. And so that seems to be the thing with Hollywood and producers. They want to do things loosely based on the truth, and so that way they can make. And again, they could take a 2-hour movie, put a name of a guy that actually existed, and put him in a car that he actually had, and send him to a McDonald's where he actually went to, and say that it's based on a true story, and then make up everything else about the film.
And you'll make note, too, that in the front row of the beginning of the film at the lecture, the actual Lorraine Warren is in the audience, but Andrea Perron is also sitting in the audience. So go back, watch The Conjuring, and see if you can see Lorraine Warren in the film, and Andrea Perron, the real person, is actually also sitting in the audience when the film opens up with the lecture scene.
Yeah, so again, as a movie, if you look at it just as a horror movie, just as that, it's a great film. But if you look at it as something based on fact, it's really not. It has, like Andrea just said, 5% of it's fact and 95% of it's made up. So I think that's the problem when you take somebody like James Wan, who wants to make the film, and it turns out to be 95% fake, when you could actually make the story truthful and make it just as good.
Well, as Andrea told us, there was a lot of horrific events that truly did happen, but they were nowhere in the film. So it's much easier to blame a supposed witch that is going to do a sacrifice to Satan. It sells more theater tickets, far more.
A lot of the locals didn't like her, but we can just say this, from living in a small town, we've lived in big towns and we lived in small towns. In small towns, people are kind of weird. And so...
they like to gossip and set rumors about.
Right. And so, especially in some of the small towns throughout the South in America, the people are pretty much weird. Really weird. And so, so who knows if this lady was actually mean or not. I mean, a lot of the people that work for her complained about her, but what employee hasn't complained about an employer? But anyway, I agree, the baby could have fell into a basket where there was a sewing needle and died that way. Who knows?
Well, Bathsheba could have been the wet nurse. Back in the day, if the mother of an infant couldn't provide nourishment, they had wet nurses. So she could have had a child of her own, or and she could have been over at the house being the nursing the baby, and again the baby could have had an accident and followed through to the knitting needles.
And I think, because this is the Conjuring show, what I'd like to do is actually dedicate this show to two people that was involved in that story that's now passed away, and that'd be Ed Warren and April Perron. So we'd like to thank Andrea for joining us, and check out her books.
Take care, and thanks for joining us. Thank you. Bye-bye.